So today we're going to talk about probiotics. What is a probiotic? I mean, what do they do? How do they work? We're going to dive deep into the whole science of probiotics because, as you know, there's a lot of interest these days about probiotics and how they differ from, say, antibiotics, what to look for, all that sort of stuff. And today we're joined Katrine. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Wade.
So there's a lot of information kind of going out there, and a few years ago, kind of the probiotic movement, if you will, has kind of exploded. But there's a lot of questions. I mean, not all probiotics are the same. What is a probiotic? How do they work? Let's just start with the basics first for our listeners today and our viewers. What is a probiotic?
Well, probiotic is a live bacteria, and pro means pro-life. So basically, you've heard about antibiotics. So
Right.
Anti means against. So antibiotics are used to kill the bad bugs and flus and infections. Probiotics are beneficial bacteria that living in your body or maybe on your skin and your gut. Actually, you have 10 times more bacteria cells living in your organism than your actual cells in the body. So it's like your second species living inside of you or on your skin. And probiotic, it means good bacteria that's beneficial for us for our health. Something that helps us protect from viruses or maybe gives us nutrients. Usually probiotics are living in our gut, and our gut, our whole digestive system, is actually one of the larger than even our skin as a interface with the outside world, because we intake the food that hosts a whole bunch of nutrients, but can also have bacteria and parasites and things like that. And then our guts are interacting with it, and we have a lot of information exchange that's happening in our gut that's coming from there and triggers all sorts of immune functions. So probiotics help us to keep a lot of those functions in check. And probiotics also crowd out the bad bugs. They are competing for nutrients with bacteria, yeast, and fungus that is not beneficial for us and that causes disease. They also modulate our immune system, so they basically protect us from some viruses and some other disease-causing, pathogenic bacteria. It's also been shown that probiotics play a role in prevention of cancer and also managing things like cancer tumors, and some other autoimmune disorders, diabetes. There's a whole host of things that probiotics are really beneficial for.
Okay, so if I understand what you're saying for our viewers is that we have good bacteria and we have bad bacteria. And up until this point, pretty much we've always focused on killing all the bacteria with antibiotics and antibacterial soap and antibacterial this. However, we need these, what we call good bacteria or probiotics, because it sounds like they're the guys that are kind of running your inner city. They're the people that make the traffic work. They make the trucks go into the stuff. Like, they seem to be workers.
Well, the workers, and you can also call them like soldiers too, because they protect the body from,
Right, okay.
From invaders and things like that. So they are a major part of your functioning in the organism. We had evolved over, thousands of years with these organisms as part of us. And it's like a symbiotic relationship in a lot of ways. We can, for example, process fiber without some of the probiotics, and we can get some of the vitamins without having those probiotics, because they do some of the work for us and digest some of the nutrients and make the nutrients more bioavailable. And they also protect us, like we just talked about, from viral infections.
Immune defense, so they're like a defense system, and
they're
also...
a first defense system, that's for sure.
Okay, so are there different types of probiotics? So some people are saying, yeah, how many like...
Well, yeah, of course, there's different types. You have more than 400 different strains of probiotics in your gut, also living on the skin as well, but mostly in your gut. And then you have different species that those strains belong to. So there's a couple of them been really well studied, like the
Lactobacillus.
Lactobacillus.
Yeah.
Lactobacillus, I know, I always have a hard time pronouncing it. Lactobacillus and bifidobacteria are the two most known They have been shown to play a role in digestion. For example, lactobacillus, some of the species have been shown to play a role in digestion of milk proteins, like, not protein sugars, like lactase. Bifidobacteria is really involved in the immune system and protecting us from all sorts of pathogens and modulating our immune system response. So basically helping our immune system to understand what is an invader and what is maybe part of our own cells, so it doesn't attack itself.
Wow, so basically they do a lot of important roles, protect us from other pathogens coming into the body. Are there some probiotics that seem to be more important than others? Do we understand this? What's your experience?
Well, it is, again, some of the probiotic strains been more studied than others, and the ones that are quite widely colonizing our gut are the two that I just mentioned, and they are supposed to be more let's say like the super strains, right?
Right.
So they do more work. So like, for example, if you're choosing a probiotic and there is a lot of species in there, sometimes it's not the best thing because you want to look for like the super ones and you want to concentrate on those. Otherwise, there's too many of them and they'll crowd each other out and there wouldn't be enough time to establish for each strain in your gut. So you're kind of wasting your money when you're using some of those probiotic pills that have several species.
Right, they can be competing cultures, kind of competing for the same job. So.
Several strains,
right.
Species.
How do you get probiotics? So I know there's supplements, there's foods. How does a person normally get those?
Well, first of all, you get it by being born and getting it from your mother's birth canal. So all the babies start out being sterile as far as bacteria goes. And when they enter in the world, they get their first bout of bacteria. And then lifestyle factors, how you've been fed as a child, if you've been breastfed, antibiotic use, your diet, exposure to stress, all those type of things will modify the amount of different strains in your gut, right? And some of them will be more beneficial, better, and some of them probably not as much. So that's kind of how you acquire your beginning microbiome. And the other one is obviously from eating food. So depending on the type of food you eat, you will have more or less of bacteria that feeds on that type of food. So if you're eating a lot of leafy green vegetables, you will have one class of probiotics, not probiotics, but strains of this bacteria basically proliferating and thriving. And if you're eating a lot of meat, there would be a different one. And to get better microbiome balance, because it's all about balance.
So when you're talking microbiome, you're talking about the total amount of bacteria, which there's somewhere around 400 strains, and I've heard some people in some countries have more than American typically. It
again depends on diet and depends on genetics and depends on where a person was living, how close they are to soil, because we are acquiring a lot of the organisms are from the soil based. So there's different variety, and you can tell that now we have the tools to sequence microbiome. I mean, sequence the DNA of all these different bugs, and to be able to sequence it tells us a lot about history and how the different Europeans have, let's say, one subset of bacteria that are more prevalent than Americans do, or people living in Amazon, like you said, would be something different.
Right.
So it all depends on the type of diet they're consuming historically and the type of lifestyle they're leading.
So basically, your microbiome or your gut bacteria culture will alter either positively or negatively, depending on what you're eating and the environment you find. And would that be why some people have trouble when they they travel somewhere and they go to different places and might be exposed to different foods or different diets or stuff like that? Or?
Well, yeah, that's part of it. Also, you could acquire some parasitic organisms as well, which are not bacteria, they're allergic to bacteria. So it's part of it, absolutely. So your gut has to have time to adjust, and there would be an adjustment period, transition period, and then you might experience digestive issues like diarrhea or constipation, because your gut has to have time to adjust to byproducts of this bacteria growing and proliferating.
So what type of foods would we find, say, these good guys, the good bacteria? Like, what kind of foods could we eat for that?
Well, some of the more known historical foods would be fermented dairy, and we're talking more about fermented raw dairy. Of course, in the last 60, 70 years, actually more than that, we had pasteurized a lot of our dairy, and it's not what historically as humans we've been eating. It's mostly been unpasteurized raw dairy that's been then fermented to have more beneficial organisms in there. Then sauerkraut is very, kind of known, especially in Eastern Europe and, in other European countries. Kimchi, also fermented vegetables, so a whole bunch of different fermented vegetables. Natto and miso, that's something that's coming from Japan, and that is quite known there too. Some of the fermented drinks like kvass and kombucha now is very popular as well. So all of those are part of the probiotic cultures that we've been consuming for generations prior to this whole westernizing and antibiotic culture.
Right, yeah, so everything's really starting to change. People starting to recognize that we need to start adding these probiotics. So I know for a lot of people that have digestive issues or have immune system issues and stuff, they find that supplementing probiotics can be very benefit. What's your experience around that and what's your thoughts around that?
Well, yes, absolutely. Nowadays we have so many triggers that can kill our good bacteria. We are not just ingrained with antibiotic use from a medical point of view, but we're also getting antibiotics in our environment through our animal food, let's say, if somebody eating, and that could be even
water.
Soil and water. There is so many prevalent antibiotic use, and we're definitely getting a lot of that. There is also high stress levels. There's a lot of chemicals present in our environment nowadays that will also affect the gut balance. GMOs, genetically modified organisms, especially a chemical called glyphosate, that affects the intestinal flora. So all of those things that are in our environment, they're definitely shifting the balance to tipping the scale to a not so good part. Right. So you want to have as many of those soldiers, as many of those good bacteria.
Strength in numbers.
Exactly. You want to be constantly, it's like a tug of war. You want to constantly putting the scale over to a place where you have good bacteria that's supporting you, that's protecting you from invaders, and that helps you have a healthier immune system.
So if a person is, so as a person, let's say they recognize, hey, I need to get a supplemental probiotic. What should they be looking for in a probiotic? Because I know there's a lot of what's called probiotics or sold as probiotics really don't have any active cultures or like people don't know how to distinguish a good probiotic from a bad probiotic.
Yeah, and then, probiotics became a huge market. It's like the new miracle pill. Right. So you do have to be kind of knowing what you're doing when you go into the store and purchasing a probiotic. First thing, obviously, to check is how many live organisms are in there, or CFU units. And that's basically, you're looking. Not always the more the better, like we said. Sometimes a whole bunch of different species can crowd each other out. So you're looking for something in 50 billion, something like that, maybe higher than that if you're trying to repopulate your gut after an antibiotic use, let's say.
Right.
Then looking for the date of expiration, obviously. You want to be having enough time, because probiotics, especially those that need to be kept in the fridge, will continue mutating sometimes, especially if they were not transported properly or been not stored in a dark place. It's a live culture, so it's constantly replicating and moving. So you want to be making sure that if it is something that says that needs to be refrigerated, that you buy it in the refrigerated section of the store and then you keep it that way. So how it stores is a factor. How many cultures were what is the number of cultures was at the date of production? It will actually tell you, because usually it will degrade as well. How many you have this time, so you want to be kind of aware of that. How well it can keep out of the fridge too. So some probiotics are shelf stable, and some of them will have limits of what temperatures they can be exposed to, and some of them don't. So if you're planning on traveling, you want to be making sure that that you're getting something that doesn't require refrigeration. Let me see what else. The medium in which the probiotic is kept, so they have to have some kind of nutrients and so they continue living. So that is usually part of that equation. And obviously what kind of species. And we now actually know more about different strains and species and what they could be useful for. So checking those out, maybe talking to your naturopath or talking to a nutritionist to finding the right probiotic for your specific issue. So that is something that you want to be looking at, probiotic. Maybe third-party certification, because probiotic market is not FDA regulated, so it's not a regulated market. So it's nice to have something that's been certified, and also reviews from other consumers. You want to know how well it's worked for other people as well.
And so, for most people, do you suggest as an extra insurance policy to be using a probiotic strain regularly, just based on the environment that we're living today?
Yes, I definitely advise that, especially for women, men too, but women tend to get into a lot of trouble with yeast infections and candidas, and pregnancy and breastfeeding. All of those have an effect on our hormonal balance. And for men too,